Every story has a hero and a villain. But what if they are the same thing? What if the hand that soothes your fever is the same one that leads you into the dark? This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of a promise whispered for 6,000 years, a promise of an end to pain. It's a promise that built empires and destroyed them, a promise that was bottled, sold, and sanctified in the halls of science, only to reveal its true, monstrous face in the quietest corners of our lives. This is the story of a flower that learned to lie, and the world that chose to believe it. So find a comfortable spot. Forget what you think you know from the movies. We're not starting in a back alley. We're starting in a field, under a sun that baked the earth between two ancient rivers. We're starting with the first and perhaps the most honest bargain humanity ever shook with a plant. The ancient bargain. Imagine you are a Sumerian farmer, thousands of years before the pyramids. Your world is one of sharp, immediate realities. A toothache that can drive you mad, a fever that can steal your child in the night, the agony of a broken bone. There are no pharmacies, no pills, no sterile operating rooms. There is only what the earth provides. And in your fields, among the wheat and barley, grows a peculiar flower, Papaver somniferum. It's beautiful, with delicate, paper-thin petals, but its beauty is fleeting. The real magic comes after the petals fall, leaving a green, globe-shaped pod. You know the secret of this pod. You've been taught by your father, who was taught by his. You take a small, curved knife and you make a few gentle scratches on the pod's skin. Almost instantly, a thick, white sap begins to ooze out, like tears. You leave it overnight. When you return in the morning, the sun has transformed the sap into a dark, sticky gum. This is opium. You call it hul gil, the joy plant. And it is. It quiets the hacking cough that keeps your family awake. It dulls the gut-wrenching pain of dysentery. Most of all, it offers the gift of sleep, a temporary escape from a world defined by hardship. This was the bargain. The plant offered relief, and in return, humanity offered cultivation, care, and reverence. The price was understood. Take too much, and the gentle sleep becomes a permanent one. It was a powerful, wild magic, but it was an honest magic. There was no deception here. The plant did exactly what it promised. This knowledge spread. It traveled in the saddlebags of traders along the Silk Road. The Egyptians depicted the poppy in their tomb art, burying their pharaohs with it to ease their passage into the afterlife. The Greeks, ever the philosophers, gave it a complex identity. They linked it to Hypnos, the god of sleep, and his son Morpheus, the shaper of dreams. But they also linked it to Thanatos, the god of death. They understood the deal. They saw both sides of the coin. Even the great Roman physician Galen, who treated emperors, saw opium as a gift from the gods. He mixed it into complex remedies called theriacs, which were considered the pinnacle of medicine for over 1,500 years. For centuries upon centuries, this was the state of things. Humanity and the poppy, locked in a primal, predictable, and deeply respected relationship. The plant was a powerful but blunt instrument. But humanity is a restless species. We are never content with wild magic. We always want to tame it, to understand it, to control it. And in the early 1800s, in a small German apothecary, a young man decided he was going to dismantle the joy plant and find its soul. In doing so, he would make a new promise, a scientific promise. And this would be the first great lie. The Alchemist's Promise. His name was Friedrich Turner. He wasn't a famous professor. He was a 20-year-old pharmacist's assistant. And he was obsessed. He was convinced that the sticky gum of opium wasn't one thing, but a cocktail of many things. He believed that hidden inside was one single, powerful substance responsible for its effects, the engine of its power. Working late at night by the flickering light of gas lamps, he performed a kind of kitchen chemistry that was both brilliant and incredibly dangerous. He dissolved the opium in acid, then used ammonia to make a substance fall out of the liquid. The result was a grayish, crystalline powder. But what was it? He tested it on some local stray dogs. They fell into a sleep so deep it was almost indistinguishable from death. To truly understand its power, he needed a human subject. So he gathered 3 of his friends, and in an act of breathtaking recklessness, they all took a dose, then a second, then a third. The experiment almost killed them, but it worked. Turner had done it. He had isolated the soul of the poppy. He named it morphine, after Morpheus, the god of dreams. This was the new promise. No more guesswork, no more variation from one crop to the next. This was pure, predictable, scientific power. A doctor could now measure out an exact dose. It was 10 times stronger than the raw opium it came from. It was hailed as a miracle. It allowed for complex surgeries that were previously impossible. It gave comfort to those suffering from the most horrific diseases. Turner hadn't just found the active ingredient, he had concentrated it. He had taken the wild magic of the plant and distilled it into a sharp, gleaming needle of pure effect. But in concentrating the power, he had also concentrated the danger, the hook. The price of this new promise became clear after the American Civil War. Morphine, delivered through the newly invented hypodermic syringe, was a godsend on the battlefield. But the soldiers who came home brought a new kind of wound with them, a gnawing, desperate craving for the medicine that had saved them. They called it the soldier's disease. It was the world's first large-scale epidemic of addiction caused by a doctor's own medicine. The scientific promise had a dark secret. The miracle cure for pain created a prison of its own. Humanity, it turned out, had not tamed the magic. We had simply made it stronger, faster, and far more cunning. And the world, now facing a monster of its own creation, desperately sought a hero to slay it. That hero would come from another German laboratory, and it would carry the most seductive and destructive promise of all. The industrial lie. By the 1890s, the world was in love with chemistry. At the forefront of this revolution was a German dye company called Bayer. They were masters at taking messy, natural substances and turning them into clean, profitable products. They had just recently taken the bark of a willow tree and created a new wonder drug you might have heard of, aspirin. Having conquered headaches, they turned their attention to the problem of morphine. The goal was simple: create a version of morphine that could kill pain and stop coughs, but without the terrible addictive properties. The task fell to a chemist named Felix Hoffmann. Using a process called acetylation, he cooked morphine with a common industrial chemical. The result was a fine, white, crystalline powder, diacetylmorphine. Bayer's head of pharmacology, a man named Heinrich Dresser, tested the new substance. It was a phenomenally effective cough suppressant, and in his limited, flawed tests, it seemed to produce a sense of euphoria and energy in the user. They felt strong, capable, heroic. And so a name was born: Heroin. This was the ultimate promise, not just a better morphine, but a safe morphine. A drug so heroic, Bayer claimed, that it could even be used to cure morphine addiction. Think about the audacity of that claim. They proposed to cure addiction to a powerful opioid with an even more powerful opioid. It was the perfect lie, wrapped in the unimpeachable authority of German science. Bayer launched one of the most aggressive marketing campaigns the world had ever seen. They sent out thousands of free samples to doctors everywhere. They advertised in medical journals, promoting heroin for everything from the common cold to serious respiratory diseases. They even sold it in a sweet-tasting elixir, making it easy to give to children. For a few years, the world celebrated. Heroin was sold over the counter, without a prescription. It sat in medicine cabinets next to the bandages and the aspirin. The hero had arrived. But the hero was a Trojan horse.
What Bayer scientists had tragically overlooked was how the drug actually worked. The chemical disguise Hoffman had given it allowed diacetylmorphine to slip past the brain's natural defenses with incredible speed. Once inside, the brain would strip off that disguise, turning it right back into morphine. The user was getting a super concentrated blast of morphine delivered directly to the brain's pleasure centers. This created a rush of euphoria far more intense and a cycle of addiction far more vicious than anything seen before. The non-addictive cure was, in reality, one of the most addictive substances ever created. The reports started trickling in. Doctors noticed their patients weren't getting better. They were getting desperate. The cure for morphine addiction was creating a new, more ferocious heroinism. The industrial lie was exposed, but the damage was done. The bottle had been opened, and the genie would not go back inside. The legal deception. Faced with a public health crisis of its own making, the United States government decided to act. The promise of the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914 was simple: control, regulation, to bring order to the chaos. On the surface, it was just a tax law. Doctors had to register and pay a tax to prescribe narcotics like morphine and heroin. But the law contained a crucial, vague phrase. They could only prescribe them in the course of his professional practice only. What did that mean? The Treasury Department, staffed by lawmen, not doctors, made a fateful decision. They decided that giving an addict opioids just to maintain their habit was not a legitimate medical practice. It was catering to a vice. And just like that, with the stroke of a pen, the promise of control became a deception. The law did not stop addiction. It simply changed its address. Doctors, fearing arrest and the loss of their licenses, stopped treating addicts. They were thrown out of clinics and into the streets, sick and desperate. The act created a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed a new kind of professional, the organized criminal. The promise of legal regulation had unintentionally created the modern black market. The price of heroin skyrocketed. Its purity became unpredictable. A public health issue was officially rebranded as a crime wave. The user, once a patient to be treated, was now a criminal to be punished. This single legal deception defined America's approach to drugs for the next century. It didn't solve the problem. It drove it underground, where it festered, grew, and became entangled with geopolitics, war, and unimaginable profit. The geopolitical lie. For decades, the global heroin supply was an art perfected by the Corsican Mafia in Marseille, France. They were the masters of the French connection, turning raw morphine base from Turkey into pure white powder and smuggling it to their partners, the American Mafia. But history took a turn in the jungles of Southeast Asia. In the lawless highlands where Burma, Laos, and Thailand meet, the Golden Triangle, the opium poppy was the currency of warlords and insurgent armies. And then America went to war in Vietnam. The official promise of the Vietnam War was to stop the spread of communism. But a quieter, dirtier promise was being made on the ground. To fight the communists, the CIA made alliances with local militias who funded their armies with one thing: opium. The agency's own proprietary airline, Air America, was known to fly guns in and drugs out. It was a grand geopolitical lie, a war for freedom financed by the tools of addiction. This created a perfect storm. On one side, you had a massive, localized supply of the purest heroin on earth. On the other, 500,000 young, frightened, and bored American soldiers. Because the heroin was so pure, it could be smoked, removing the taboo of the needle. It was a cheap, easy escape from the hell of war. An epidemic swept through the U.S. military. When these soldiers came home, they were no longer just veterans. They were addicts. They returned to a country that didn't understand them and a drug market that was completely different. The cheap, smokable heroin of Vietnam didn't exist in America, so to feed their new habit, they had to turn to the needle. They became the visible, tragic face of a new heroin crisis, a crisis born from a war wrapped in deception. The corporate lie revisited. You would think the world would have learned its lesson from Bayer and heroin. You would think that the promise of a safe opioid would never be believed again. You would be wrong. In 1996, a private, family-owned company named Purdue Pharma released a new drug called OxyContin. The active ingredient, oxycodone, was a powerful opioid, but Purdue made a heroic promise, eerily similar to Bayer's a century earlier. They claimed their patented time-release coating made the drug virtually non-addictive. They cited a single, misleading paragraph in a letter to a medical journal to claim the risk of addiction was less than 1%. It was the Bayer lie updated for the 21st century and amplified by a marketing machine of breathtaking cynicism. They targeted overworked family doctors in places like Appalachia and the Rust Belt. They flew doctors to lavish seminars, gave out branded merchandise, and pushed a new philosophy that pain was a fifth vital sign that needed to be eliminated at all costs. Their promise was of compassion. Their goal was profit. And it worked. OxyContin became a blockbuster drug, earning the Sackler family, who owned Purdue, billions of dollars. But just like a century before, the promise was a lie. Users quickly discovered that crushing the pill defeated the time release, unleashing its full narcotic power in a single addictive rush. A new generation got hooked not on street drugs, but on a pill from their doctor. When the prescriptions ran out, or the doctors grew suspicious, these patients, construction workers, high school athletes, suburban parents, were left with a raging addiction. They were forced to turn to the street. And what they found waiting for them was a cheap, plentiful, and molecularly similar substitute: heroin. The corporate lie of OxyContin didn't just create a new crisis. It built a 4-lane highway connecting the doctor's office directly to the heroin dealer's corner. The final deception. The heroin story has always been about a plant, about soil and sun and farmers. But its final, deadliest chapter has nothing to do with agriculture. It was written in a laboratory. Criminal chemists, primarily working for Mexican cartels, realized they could bypass the poppy plant entirely. They could synthesize an opioid that was far more potent and far more profitable: fentanyl. A drug created for end-of-life cancer pain, so powerful that its dose is measured in micrograms, millionths of a gram. It is 50 times stronger than heroin. This was the final, most terrifying deception. The promise from the dealer's perspective was a better product. But for the user, it was a trap. The heroin they thought they were buying was being secretly cut with fentanyl. Soon it wasn't cut at all. The bag that used to contain heroin now just contained fentanyl. The drug itself had become a lie. An overdose became a game of Russian roulette with every single dose. The difference between the high the user sought and the dose that would stop their breathing was an amount so small it was invisible to the naked eye. A few grains of salt. The death toll has been apocalyptic. It is a quiet plague happening in bedrooms and public bathrooms. It is the final, brutal consequence of a century of broken promises. The concentrated power Sir Turner unlocked, the heroic lie Bayer sold, the criminal market the Harrison Act created, and the corporate greed that Purdue unleashed, all led here to a synthetic poison that has killed hundreds of thousands. After a 6,000-year story of lies, grand and small, where do we go from here? The answer is perhaps to finally make an honest promise. The harm reduction movement is that promise. It is not a promise of a miracle cure. It is not a promise to end addiction overnight. Its promise is simple, humble, and profound. We will do everything we can to keep you alive today. That promise looks like a nasal spray called Narcan. It's an overdose antidote that can literally pull someone back from the brink of death. It's putting this life-saving tool in the hands of not just paramedics, but librarians, parents, and other drug users.
That promise looks like a supervised consumption site, a clean, safe place where people can use drugs without fear of dying alone in an alley. It's a place that says your life has value even in the depths of your addiction. And that promise looks like medication-assisted treatment, using drugs like methadone and buprenorphine to end the brutal cycle of withdrawal and craving, giving people the stability they need to rebuild their lives. This isn't a heroic promise. It's a practical one. It's an admission that the war on drugs has failed, and that a war on drug users is a war on our own families and neighbors. After a long, dark history of chasing a magic bullet that always turned out to be a real one, the only way forward is to embrace the messy, complicated, and compassionate work of healing. The story of the poppy is a story of a simple plant that became a symbol of humanity's greatest hopes and deepest flaws. It's a reminder that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves in the desperate search for an easy escape from pain. And the only true antidote, the only real miracle, has been here all along. The choice to treat one another not as villains, not as heroes, but simply as human beings worthy of another chance at life.